Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey Bill, how you doing?
Never been this happy. How about yourself?
I've never been this curious.
Awesome.
Today, we are here to talk about, are you ready to be a mentor? You know, it's not like people come out of the womb ready for being a mentor. There's some skills involved and there's some techniques involved in being a mentor. And we're here to address some of those, right? It's not about learning a single method. It's about developing a set of habits and skills and mindsets that consistently help someone else grow. So what we're going to be talking about today is a simple, clear path that a person can follow, especially if you want to get good at mentoring on purpose rather than by trial and error.
Yeah, the first sort of caveat to that conversation starts with, as we're talking about this, we're talking about acting with long-term benefits in mind. Okay, we're not transactional. We believe that you're trying to make decisions. If you're talking about professional mentoring, you'd like to be making decisions that are going to outlast your time on the program or in an organization, because it gives you a much healthier long-term view. There certainly are people who make decisions based on a very short-term focus and, well, I only care about the time that I'm here or the time that I'm on this program. And so I've watched this a number of times in my professional life where people are totally counting their wins and losses based on the time that they're in the position, how much money they get while they're there, what contracts they put in place, what hires they do. And they only care about it as long as the time of their tenure. And, that transactional behavior is not just short-term minded, but it's probably not in the best interests of the people around them or the programs around them or the organizations for which they work. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about how to get short-term gains without thinking about what are the long-term implications. That means you're talking about building long-term relationships. And so we're going to focus on doing that with relational leaders who are interested in a legacy way beyond their time in the organization.
Yeah, we're not talking about the people who care more about what work is getting done, but rather who is doing the work. That's what relational leadership is all about.
Yeah, like what relationships are all about, at least good ones.
Right. Yeah. And so knowing that, first of all, knowing whether or not you're a transactional person, a transactional leader or a relational leader is one piece to know whether or not you're ready to be a mentor. What are some other key aspects on whether or not a person is recognizing whether or not they're ready to take on mentorship?
Sure. So if you're going to mentor, you got to believe and know in your heart that that's going to take some real serious time and dedication. And I know we've discussed this in previous podcasts, but you got to be able to take the time to be very, very present in the time that you're spending with your mentees. In those meetings, I acknowledge that those meetings are not a huge percentage of the mentor's schedule, but while you're with the mentee, they're your sole purpose in life for that hour or two that you're spending with them. And so you got to be present with them. You got to be listening to them. And so again, we keep emphasizing this, but it's going to come up repetitively in any good conversation about mentoring. You got to be working on your listening skills. And as you're listening for understanding, then that also extends into asking questions that are going to lead to insight. You're not looking for yes or no answers. You're looking for the mentee to be able to express what's on their mind, what's powering them for that day, what are their motivations. And so it's just critical to be able to do those things and be able to listen without needing to tell the mentee everything that you know as your first starting place. The other part is, and maybe we could have started with this, do you really get enjoyment from helping other people grow. Obviously, everybody has real, a real serious and obvious interest in their own careers. Do you get real passionate reward? Do you get that kind of reward from helping others grow? And so that just is so fundamental to people's success and success in the mentoring relationship.
Yeah, so you're talking about, you know, the mentor, in order to be a really good, effective mentor, will care about another person's career and watching them and helping them grow. Will support them in that. Will dedicate the time. And by dedicating the time, we're not talking about checking the box. We're talking about truly being committed to putting away all distractions and dedicating the time when the mentee is in front of you to sit and have a conversation with them and to be supportive of them during that time. And you also, we've also talked about that as active listening skills. We'll get more into those and some of the other behaviors, those enduring traits that we've talked about in the past. We'll go further into those as well. And then just also recognizing whether or not you're a relational or a transactional kind of leader. And when you're a relational, that leads to more trust, more growth, and more good mentoring opportunities. Whereas transactional, let's acknowledge that these people exist in the workplace, right? They exist. Those folks are more in tune with short-term gains than they are in long-term growth of individuals across their industry and organization and team. And those folks may not be ready to be good mentors. In fact, I'm going to go so far as to
You
say
can
they
say it.
are not
Yeah,
ready to be good mentors.
absolutely. If all you care about is very short term things, you're probably really good at task management, but that doesn't necessarily make you a good people manager. And so I don't think we have to be too shy about it. If you only care about tasks and you don't care about people, that's not a good start to your mentoring journey.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. And so the first thing to for a mentor, a proposed mentor, a potential mentor to do, what's the very first thing that they need to do?
Well, so I mean, starts with adopting that mindset of a mentor, and frankly, I would suggest this comes naturally to some people, not as naturally to others. And so, if it doesn't come naturally to you, then you need to start thinking about some things like remembering that this is the mentee's journey; it's not yours, right? So you're guiding them, you're not steering them. You're helping them, and you're trying to help them think through the problems, but you're not trying to think for them. And so, like we talked about, open-ended questions and so forth that get them to think through problem sets. And this is where we've also talked about these are more coach-like skills. And with the professional coach in the call here, I'm sure you can resonate with the thought: you're not telling people how to get stuff done. At some point, it's in a mentoring journey. Yes, of course, you're offering to help with advice, but you're not starting from that place. You're trying to help them grow and help them think for themselves. And so, as a mentor, more valuable than your answers are your questions. Are you asking those kinds of questions that get them to think through the problems and get them to think about what's important to them, not what's important to you, what's important to them. And so, along that path, it's going to take them some time. If you're the mentor in this relationship that we're online with, one of us has been around a lot longer, so I have more experience. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily smarter than you about anything, but I do have more experience. And so it may take you more time as the mentee to sort of figure stuff out. As the mentor, your job is to help with movement and growth. It isn't to necessarily rush them to an answer. So if you could internalize those things, remembering that it's the mentee's journey and not yours, that clarity for the mentee beats giving them advice, using powerful questions and helping them progress being more important than gaining perfection, that's a really good start for any mentor who's starting down this path.
Yeah, I agree. And thinking more about that progress idea, it's also important for the mentor to recognize that just doing the work of being a mentor is better than being a perfect mentor. Like stepping into the game, right? There are no
That,
perfect mentors,
absolutely true. Well,
other than, of course, the one on this call.
present company excluded, of course.
Present company excluded.
No,
Absolutely.
I'm clear. Trust me, I'm very clear that I was never a perfect mentor. But as a mentor, you certainly would hope that along the path you're helping people progress in their careers.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about some essential skills. You know, you talked about coach like skills, and we've talked about them in the past, but just re emphasizing those because they are so stinking important. Three essential skills that a mentor leverages. And these three skills do 80% of the work. So really honing in on them is super important. And the first is that listening piece, like that active listening where you're truly engaged. You're really to listen to understand what the mentee is saying rather than preparing in your brain what next to say. And actually, you can train to be a better listener by asking specific questions. Things like, what matters most about this for you? Or tell me more about the situation. Or just thinking to yourself when you're in a mentor mentee conversation, who's doing the majority of the talking? If it's you as the mentor, then guess what? You're not leveraging or leaning into that active listening skill. Another is powerful questioning.
I'm sorry, before we get to questions,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do the foot stomp on the listening part. And I would encourage mentors to recognize, at least in my opinion and experience, that active listening and getting good at it and staying good at it is a process, not an end. Because most people, you sort of get into the conversation and you want to contribute. You, as a mentor, oh, I've been through that. I need to tell them exactly how that could work out. And there will be time for those things, but practicing, and we've talked about this before as well, practicing getting used to sort of uncomfortable periods of silence. Make sure that they've had a chance to express everything that's on their mind. I found this as a very powerful tool in personal relationships as well, when I used to think that when somebody stopped talking that they were done, and really they were just gathering their thoughts for the next paragraph. And I found that works really well at home, to just keep my big yapper shut for a little bit longer. And it's a powerful tool that says, I'm going to make sure you get to talk first. And so, just in case people haven't listened to the other podcasts, you got to foot stomp being good at listening and practicing it and rehoning those skills, because you'll get it. One day it's different from the next. You might be more energized about what you want to get into it with them. Make sure you're still listening. Make sure you give them the chance to get whatever is on their chest off, so that you can actually know what's going on in their lives, what's important. If you can't do the active listening part, the rest of it almost doesn't get there, because you don't know what's driving the mentee. You
Yeah,
got
it's
to
such
get
a
to that part.
foundational skill, right? It's like,
It absolutely is a foundational skill.
and the rest of it flows so much easier when there is active listening. Because guess what? When you're active listening, you're present.
Yeah.
You aren't distracted by the emails coming in, the chats coming in, the texts coming in, the phone calls, whatever it
Well,
might be.
even more to that point, you're not distracted by what you're thinking about, how you have to get the next lines. I have to tell them about this and I have to tell them about that, as opposed to listening to what they're saying and making sure you
Exactly.
totally understand that first. You'll have time. It's okay. I mean, particularly if you're doing mentoring seriously, you're going to have the time, because you're going to be putting the time aside. But to your point about being present, it doesn't mean being present so you can tell them everything you know. It means being present about understanding exactly where they're coming from.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have obviously need to tell you everything I know, so I'm going to continue on.
Please, I'm going to listen.
The second skill, which we've honed in on before, is those Powerful questions. So how do you ask a powerful question? And just a reminder that powerful questions are ones that are not closed ended questions where the response is either yes or no. They're open ended questions. They elicit a deeper response. It's sort of like when you're talking to your kids and how was your day? Fine. You know, is everything okay? Yes. Right? So how can you ask a question that elicits much more powerful answer that create insights? So what outcome are you really trying to create? What's the real barrier here? Is it a skill issue, confidence, capacity, or permission? What's the barrier that's stopping you from moving forward in the direction that you want to go? And mentors, sometimes this can be a real tricky skill to learn because you don't feel necessarily like you've got this bank of questions to ask. And it's something that becomes much easier with practice. And in order to get that practice, it might be worth sitting down and writing a list of questions that you could ask if you get stuck in a conversation with your mentee that are powerful, that are not closed ended, that are open ended, and that provoke thought and insight. If your questions to your mentee are easily answered with yes or no, then do some reflection and look to see how you can switch those questions up with thoughtful questions that generate conversation.
So I've loved that conversation that you just had, because getting good at those questions is how you get to the next step, the next level of trust and understanding with the mentee. You know, if the short answer questions don't really give you much of anything, but you know, after start getting good at that, then one of those types of questions that I find powerful, that is good for, you know, the accountability portion of working with your mentee, is after they've said this is what they want to do and this is why they want to do it, and they think that these are the barriers, and you know, they've gone in sort of the generalized discussion about what they're trying to accomplish. One of the easiest next questions that I didn't really used to use until I took the David Allen Getting Things Done, because it's one of his fundamental things, is, so what's the next action? What's the next step you're going to take? Because when you're the mentee and you're trying to look forward for this long-term strategy for your personal career, that's all great, but okay, now you're the mentor again. If you're trying to hold them accountable, an easy way to do that is say, so what's the next step? And when are you going to get that done? And then how are you going to keep yourself accountable to that? And so those kinds of questions where you're demonstrating accountability, but you're not trying to control them. You're not the supervisor. You're not the project manager. These are questions between mentor and mentee that, if they don't get it done, it's just, you know, maybe they're disappointing their mentor, but there's no obvious awful thing that happens. It's not like you're going to take their pay away or fire them or do something stupid like that. It's just a simple way to do accountability with three very straightforward questions that are very powerful, again, because it's still letting them be in charge of what's going on and you compassionately holding them accountable.
Yeah. You know, as we're talking about these three skills and we're talking about whether the mentor is ready to actually mentor, to do the action of mentoring, then the mentor is meeting up with the mentee, let's say for the first time or within the first 2 or 3 times that they meet. What is one of the most important pieces for the mentor to get clarity of?
Well, generally speaking, I would say there's sort of 3 questions that you want to start with as you're getting warmed up. You know, what are your goals for the next 6 to 12 months? And, you know, where do you most want to grow? And how will you know if this mentoring is helping? So it's not only sharing what's on their mind about where they're trying to go, but it's also going to give mentor and mentee some accountability. How are you going to know if it's helping? How are you going to measure whether this is actually making a difference for you? And so that's a good way to sort of start off with a shared set of targets as opposed to sort of the wandering conversations that might go without at some point getting specific. You don't necessarily have to start with those 3 questions in your first mentoring session, but you might want to get to them sometime during that mentoring session as you're getting to know somebody and you're starting to build the trust with them. Okay, now we're building our relationship, but it's not just so we can chat with each other. It's where are you going, and how can I get you there, and how will we know if we're succeeding?
Mm-hmm. We've talked too about how the relationship between a mentor and mentee is often different than with a line supervisor, with somebody in their direct chain of command, right? That writes their evaluations, that gives them bonuses, that, identifies whether or not
Sure.
they're, ready for promotion, whatever it might be that the line leadership helps with in any industry. And so the mentee might share with the mentor something that they wouldn't necessarily share with their direct supervisor. And being trustworthy with that information is essential to have a good mentor mentee relationship. I'm wondering if you have any experience or a story or something that really emphasizes that more.
So certainly, in my experience, I have worked with folks where they shared something very, very personal. It was very clear to me, and I'm not sure it always is clear to others, but it was very clear to me that it was a very, very personal conversation. And what you have to know as a mentor is when they share something deeply personal that they might find embarrassing in some other situation outside your relationship, you owe them the trustworthiness not to share that ever unless they want you to share it. And so there's no question, if you can't be a trustworthy confidant, if you can't be that person, you can't be a mentor.
What I'm thinking about, like, for example, if somebody comes to you as a mentor and says, I'm aiming to move off of project X and into project Y,
Yeah,
then it's incredibly important that you as the mentor doesn't go to the lead of project X and say, oh, well, she's not going to be there long anyway.
absolutely true. And certainly that's been an experience. I need to get off this project. And as a mentor, it wasn't my job to go tell anybody else about that. But I did counsel the person that said, okay, well, that's a totally fine approach. How are you going to let people know that that's what your
Right.
intentions are? And how are you going to define a transition plan for whatever your job was, who you handing that off to? And how are you going to get people set up to do that? And how are you going to bring somebody in to do those things? All of those kinds of conversations become the mentoring part. And that's a conversation that I had with the mentee, not with the project leads, and until they had been informed. And then I'm happy to help with those transition plans with the other folks. But to your point, somebody says, I'm moving and I haven't told somebody that I am. Yeah, you need to be the trustworthy person who gives them the advice on how to proceed next, not that you're the person who rings the alarm for all those project managers. And so now it happened on your schedule and not on your mentee's schedule.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, it is not your job to tell.
No, it's certainly not. Actually, but it brings up an important point for people who are mentors because they are often in positions of authority. Not always, but can be in positions of authority. As I moved up the management chain, this became an important conversation when I was mentoring somebody. If the mentee came to me and actually was starting to identify a behavior that they were experiencing in the workplace that actually requires management intervention, sexual harassment, hostile work environment, any of those things that does on occasion happen in any given organization. I, as a manager in that organization, I would have to tell those mentees, look, you need to stop right now. if we're going to go into a conversation that either talks about sexual harassment or hostile work environment, if you tell me the details of that thing, I am now obligated to go do something about it. If you
Yes.
want me to, if you want my help, then please continue.
Yeah.
If you don't want my help, then you need to go to HR about those things so that you can get started in the process that you want to follow. Or if you want to suck it up for a while because you don't want anybody else to know, then you're going to have to talk to somebody else about it. But you can't talk to a manager who is in a position who has a legal obligation to do something about it and then say, "You're my mentor. I can't believe you did that." That's the one sort of boundary condition that I'm going to put on this, because certainly there are behaviors in the workplace that your mentee might be experiencing that if you're in a management position, you may be seriously obligated to do something about. So those are important sort of boundary conditions that you want to talk to your mentees about before
Yeah.
they tell you that kind of a detail.
Yeah. We're legal obligations aside,
Sure.
anything else, we're saying keep your trapper shut until the mentee has shared their news.
Right.
Yeah.
And you certainly are, once you build the trusting relationship, you could say, okay, well, I could talk to somebody about that issue. You need to let me know if you want my help in doing that.
Right. If you get the mentee's permission. That's right.
Yeah, if I get their permission and they actually want the help, sure, of course I'm glad to help.
Yeah. And all very fair and true points. Some folks, like when they get into a mentoring conversation, it, especially if you're new to mentoring, it might be helpful to have kind of a structure to the conversation. Certainly not everybody needs that. It could just flow naturally and be organic and see where it goes and
I don't
whatnot.
remember the structured part of any of our conversations,
We
Angela. I just
we
got to say.
never had a structured conversation. That's very true. That's very true. With the exception of, I don't know, what appetizer did you want to share?
Yeah, there we go.
That might have been the very first piece of every mentoring conversation that we had. But it might help for some folks to have some sort of structure. If they're
Absolutely.
not sure exactly where to start with structuring a mentoring conversation, what would you recommend?
Well, I think we've sort of put together a list of questions that might help structure the flow for something. And so, and conveniently, they all start with A. So maybe there's a mnemonic there for helping people remember. If you're looking for a structure, I'd say, so start with an ask. What do you want to focus on today? And then you could go to alignment that says, what would a good look be for by the end of our conversation? And after that, analyze, what's happening now and why do you think it's happening? Advance. So what are the options given that environment? And then action, as we talked about a minute ago, what are you going to do next? Specifically, what action are you going to take next? And accountability, how are you going to follow through on that action? So it certainly is a basic flow that's worth thinking about as you're going into the conversations. Ask, align, analyze, advance, action, and accountability. It would easily lend some good structure as your mentoring relationship evolves. You probably won't have to think about it in that way, but it's a healthy way to structure the thinking process.
My fellow coaches will recognize that's a very coach-like kind of conversation in and of itself as well.
Sure.
And these that kind of structure really helps when there's nothing acute happening in a mentee's life, and it's important at the beginning of every conversation, a mentor-mentee conversation, to figure out, like, use a little bit of intuition on where the mentee is. If it seems like they're distracted, if it seems like there's something significant going on in their life that might be consuming their emotional energy or cognitive energy away from their work life, ask them about it. And that it clears the mentee from whatever's on their chest to get it off their chest and prepares the mentoring conversation for whatever it needs to be. So if a mentee walks into your office or into the conversation and seems very upset or distracted or angry or whatever it might be, you don't start with this 6 A's to of a structured mentoring conversation. You actually provide an opportunity to be a sounding board for concerns that the mentee has in both their professional and personal experiences.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that any better. It's so fundamentally meaningful for the relationship as you grow in the trust relationship with your mentee. I had actually a number of experiences over the years where I could tell by the body language as they walked into the room something's really bothering them, and it sometimes was professional, oftentimes was personal, and a first question of "Are you okay?" was a very powerful question because it's not going to get a yes or no answer. It's going to be, "No, I'm really upset about something." So let's talk about that first. I know we had a plan for what we're going to talk about today, but we're going to talk about what's on your mind right now 1st. And in my experience, depending on what the situation is, you can get to very deep and personal conversations. When they're really, really upset, you're going to get to really know what's going on in their lives. And
Yeah.
that's going to be an important part of that trusting mentor relationship and will help you in structuring what next actions you'll be taking as the mentor, whether you're helping them through personal or professional crises if they're that kind of upset.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so another piece of becoming even better as a mentor is reflecting. How did that conversation go? You've just had this structured or unstructured conversation with your mentee. And then you think after each time you meet, what did I do well? Where did I talk too much and wasn't asking enough questions? Which question did I ask that really created some good insight? And what might I do differently next time? So mentors become great mentors by doing some reflecting and adjusting and not just repeating the cycle over and over.
Yeah, absolutely critical. I mean, nobody's perfect at all this ever, frankly, but they don't get good at it without some self-reflection, just like you'd expect for your mentee about how they're proceeding. The mentor should be doing exactly the same kinds of thinking about whether or not they're happy with what went on. So as we're wrapping up here, mentors need to be very honest with themselves about whether or not they're ready to be a mentor. And if you're not an expert at the skills, that's fine. Nobody starts out as an expert in most of these skills. It takes some practice to get really, really good at active listening. It takes some practice to get good at asking powerful questions and being able to hold people accountable to the goals they've set up for themselves, but as a mentor in a very compassionate way. You're not, we've talked about it. You're not their supervisor or their project manager. So you're trying to help them and still hold them accountable, but the good news is you don't have to hammer them about it. You can just sort of gently remind them about what they're trying to get done. And so I think we've laid out a roadmap for how to hold mentoring conversations, but this is, mentoring is an art form. It's not a science. And so the successful mentoring relationship is going to define its own path as you work with your mentee. And we need the mentors to be honing those abilities with a lot of time and reflection about how they're doing and adjusting the approach as they go. If you want to be an effective mentor, the most important part, frankly, is just getting started. Get started down this path and work up that set of skills and check yourself as you go and update and improve and keep on going.
Just get started.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email, which we've included in the show notes. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, 5 stars, of course, and share with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.